afternoon, everyone. I hope that everyone is doing good. I hope that everyone is doing well, and I hope that you are doing your lessons. For our first topic, we have globalization, world Englishes, culturally sensitive and bias-free language. So allow me first to read the introduction of our today. The world that you are about to face is becoming demanding to meet the needs of a globalized society, and the impact of globalization on communication skills development has become an emergent necessity to comply with and for the future. This lesson will introduce you to the topic on globalization. And for our learning objectives, we have number one, you are expected to understand the implications of globalization in communication, explain the notion of world Englishes in the context of English being a global language, and use standard English and bias-free language in writing. Okay, globalization. With globalization, it makes the world a smaller place to live. No? Because it's very easy now to send an email to a friend who's living abroad, or to call somebody living outside your country or across international boundaries. Also, when we travel, or if we want to travel, airfare now is cheaper. And then, especially that we have the advent of technology. Ayan. So in what ways does globalization affect communication? Number one, I would say it creates, or it helps create business opportunities. That's one. It also eradicates cultural barriers. No? Instead, it fosters multicultural understanding. Okay, just to share, I spent 1 year as an intern in Singapore. Okay, before, I'm not really accustomed to the culture of the Indians. No, to me, ang babaho nila. To me, I don't really understand how they stare women. But of course, because I travel and because there is communication between my Indian friends and me, slowly I understand their ways. I understand the differences between us, tayo, mga Filipino, and them as Indians. I would say na because of communication, there is understanding. And with that, we should really be thankful. No? Dapat magpasalamat ta, anak. Ayan. So there are really a lot of differences. Another thing that I discovered when I was in Singapore, Singaporeans speak English differently. They call the term Singlish. It's actually a mixture of Singaporean language and English. So they call it English. They don't really practice or apply so much grammar in their English, like you eat already, so something like that. So it's very different when Filipinos speak English and Singaporeans speak English. So there are really differences, and that is an example, I would say, to the term word Englishes. It means differences in the English language. Okay, for example, a store is selling liquor or alcoholic beverages. So in American English, they use the term liquor store. But in British English, they use the term off-license store. Ayan. So see, may pagkakaiba. Aver Jones, a 55-year-old African-American woman, has not been feeling well. Since she is new in town and has not yet had a chance to establish care with a physician, she decides to go to Dr. James Morrison at her friend's recommendation. Upon their first meeting, the 32-year-old Dr. Morrison introduces himself as Dr. Morrison and calls her Avery. Dr. Morrison then assumes that she is on Medicaid. Avery Jones leaves Dr. Morrison's practice upset and decides to find a different doctor. Dr. Morrison is obviously confused about her response. So, what did he do wrong? In this example, Dr. Morrison was not being culturally sensitive. In many cultures, it is customary to call people by their last names, especially when they are older than you. Okay, since Dr. Morrison called his patient Avery instead of Mrs. Jones, she took it as a sign of disrespect. To make matter worse, Dr. Morrison assumed that Avery was on Medicaid. So it's actually a insurance, medical insurance, based solely upon his initial impression of her. This not only upset Mrs. Jones, but also prevented her from getting the medical treatment that she needed. So, what would the culturally sensitive approach look like? Okay. 1. Instead of calling her Avery, Dr. Morrison would have asked her how she would like to be dressed. He could then make a note in her chart so that all of the staff know to address her as Mrs. Jones. Number 2. Instead of assuming that Mrs. Jones was on Medicaid, Dr. Morrison would have asked her if she had medical insurance and who her insurance provider was. Or maybe he would have avoided the subject altogether, as most practices have a billing department that handles insurance matters. Ayan. So, the example that I have read is an example of not being culturally sensitive. See, if everyone is just culturally sensitive, we could have, a better place to live. Ayan. So, start being culturally sensitive, especially when we talk, especially when we speak. Especially if we're talking to elders, especially if we're talking to our teachers, to our parents, and even to our friends.